I've been at Google 12 years. Actually, next Monday, it'll be my 12th year anniversary. Of those 12 years, I've been working on Angular since 2009. So we're coming up on the 10th year of Angular at Google. I never thought this was going to happen. I never thought we would get here. Matter of fact, I thought our project was going to be canceled. I'll tell you a little bit about that. In looking forward, we're going to talk about the roadmap for Angular here at the end. I want to talk a little bit about how we got here and some of the recent things we've done before we get into where we're going next. So at Google, yeah, we started 10 years ago. When Mishko and Mishko is the other co-founder of Angular, we got to Google, we worked on a bunch of big projects, and we saw a lot of the trouble they would run into. Big teams, they would start small, not ever realizing that they were going to be successful. They would have issues at scale. And we thought maybe we could help them out if there was a web framework that made it easier to interact with the DOM, gave you some default infrastructure, made testing a first-class citizen so that you could have reliable releases again and again. We had been doing this for about a year, and we'd gotten a couple customers, and we thought we were doing amazing things. It was November 16th in 2010 that we had our first engineering review, when we were going to go in front of our engineering VPs and get some feedback, and hopefully get funding and the ability to go do this more. We were super excited because one of the guys there was this guy, Urs Holze. He was a big, heavy hitter, and he still is. Still works at Google, manages a lot of stuff. What we were hoping for was compliments. Instead, what we got was him telling us, "You are all liars." And we said, "Liars?" Not exactly the feedback we were hoping for. And we all there was other feedback we were given that day, but we didn't really hear any of it because the word liars was ringing in our ears. And so we slunk back to our desk, really kind of thinking this was it. There was nothing left to do, and we should kind of polish our resumes and figure out how to maybe clean the bathrooms or something useful at Google. Later that day, I had kind of recovered a little bit. We had an internal social media product called Google Buzz. Maybe 5 people on the outside have ever used it. Anybody? No, nobody. Yes, you guys. OK, good. Thank you. I posted this. I said, "Check out the framework Urs doesn't want you to use." Not my finest career choice. At the same time, this actually got a lot of attention. A lot of folks came to check it out. Unfortunately, so did Urs. What Urs wrote, he was very good-natured, and he said, "Hey, guys, what I meant was that you haven't earned any of those claims you were making." And he was totally right. He was totally right. He's like, "You have to go prove this out with a bunch of big teams and show us that all of those things you claimed can be done at scale." If we fast forward to 2018, there are some teams at Google who went and analyzed what do Google engineers use to build front ends. Like in the outside world, Google engineers have a choice of many different ways to build front ends. What they found was that Angular is actually used by more than any other web framework by front-end developers at Google. We've come quite a ways. Matter of fact, for me, this is huge, because for me, Angular was always a side project. We've recently gotten some good news about Angular. This just, in 2018, became my full-time project. So excited about it. If we look broader, past just what's going on at Google, which is awesome, and that's what I actually get paid for. I don't get paid for doing the external stuff. I do it because I love it. Outside of Google, we got some really good news at the beginning of 2018, where Crunchbase surveyed their sort of seed and early stage startups to find out what are they using. And they found that Angular, more than anything else, is being used not just across front-end frameworks, but also across back-end technologies like Ruby, Express, Django, all these things, which, by the way, are not competitors. You use these in conjunction with Angular often. And then if we look at our best signal for growth in the Angular environment, it's how many people are coming to our website on a monthly basis. And this has actually grown from December last year to just under 1 million to over 1.5 million developers coming to the Angular site every month. This has been Angular's biggest year of growth ever. So I want to thank all of you for being part of this. Thanks for coming. Thanks for being part of the Angular community. Now that we're big enough, like I said, I don't get paid more if there's more of you using Angular, but thank you. This is what drives me. I love it. I love that we can help more people. I want to make sure that our growth in the future grows like we've grown to date, which is kind of the flavor of what's on my t-shirt. I want this to feel like a family. I want this to feel like a place that we can all grow, that we can be supported, and that we're going to pass that on. We're going to repeat that and make sure that other people are going to feel the same way when they come. This isn't a feature of Angular, but it is a thing of Angular. And I want that to be core when you go back to your own communities, that you do something like this. Okay, this is my daughter. Her name's Larkin. She's 7. And she is crazy, like her dad. This is the thing I'm proudest about her. By the way, she approved the story I'm about to tell. When she was 5, I'm cooking dinner, and she comes into the kitchen, and she asked me a really critical question to her. She said, "Daddy, do you pick your nose?" And I had a conflict in my head. Because on one hand, I want to be a truthful parent. And on the other hand, I want to set her up for success in life. So what did I do? I went in the middle of the road. I said, well, honey, yeah, as a kid, I probably picked my nose. And as an adult, I've learned it's better to use a Kleenex to not catch a disease and not offend anyone. So that's what you should do. She went on, Daddy, when you picked your nose, did you eat your boogers? Again, I had some conflict. But I said, honey, just use a Kleenex. It's way better. Daddy, do you want to see me eat my boogers? I'm like, no. She says, well, then don't look at me. Okay, kind of a funny story, but I'm telling you this so you'll remember what she was asking is, what's the appropriate behavior for me in my family, in my society? What's going to be okay? That's what I want to talk about just a wee bit before we get into feature talk. I want you to all help. When you create these sort of excellent experiences, this inspires other people to do the same. This is why the Angular community is the wonderful place it is. I need you all to help me. Do something great to support somebody else coming into the community. When you see somebody who needs help, help them. This is what really makes me excited to be part of the Angular project. This is why the whole team, does the external work at Angular and not just works inside Google. For the most part, we see a really non-normal distribution curve at Angular. Most of the stuff is hecka good. I love it. The more we do good stuff, the more people see good stuff happen, the more that it happens. Bad things do happen. We have an email address, conduct@angular.io. If you see something that's just not going well, we can help out. Send us email. We want to know. We do want to help out. It just doesn't happen that often. When you go to your meetups, and you should attend your local meetups. There's probably already one in your local area. If you want to do one yourself, you can go talk to Bonnie Brennan. Is she still in the room? I don't know. There she is. She started one in Houston? Yes, she knows all about it. Go back there, help support them. You should give a talk, especially if you feel like you should not give a talk. That's the best time to go give a talk. You're going to learn so much. You're going to be amazing because you did that. Go do it 20 times, and you're going to be awesome at giving it talks. All right, let's move on to some feature stuff. Back in 2018, we had 2 big releases, Angular 6 and Angular 7. If you're kind of new to the Angular environment, one of the big differentiating features for Angular is that we build everything for you that comes out at the same release number, that's guaranteed to work together and integrated together. One of the places this is really critical is a place that we also invested a lot in 2018, which is Angular Universal for doing server-side rendering. As a recap of what this is, when you send your first request to the browser, we actually run your full application on the server. You can then send back an HTML version of your app for a really fast initial view, and then the JavaScript of your application comes down, and it works as a single-page application from then on out. The reasons you might want to do this, number one, if you want to have thumbnails for your application that go in Reddit or Twitter or Facebook or applications like this, they're not going to run your JavaScript for you. You need to do that for them. For speed, like Mike was talking about earlier, if I want to have that initial page load very fast, I can do that using server-side rendering. And then if I want to get the search engines to crawl my site and index it appropriately, some of them will run your JavaScript for you, but generally they don't do as good a job as if you run it for them and give them HTML. So in other words, if you want to be good, faster, popular, maybe this is for you. Even for some internal sites, I've heard from a lot of big corporations now that their folks want the same user experience for their corporate apps that they get on the external end user apps. Might be something to think about. We implemented this for a team at Google, the Google Shopping Express folks. They were also really excited about delivering a fast experience for their mobile users. Even at the P90 percentile, they found that using Angular server-side rendering improved their first paint speed by 2.3 times. Definitely a good investment. One of the techniques that we use, or one of the technologies we use, is something else that we released in 2018, which is called Angular Elements, which basically allows you to take part of your Angular application and turn it into something that looks like a regular DOM element. This has a lot of nice properties. One is, since it's based on standards, everybody knows how to interact with it. You don't have to be an Angular expert. Once you export part of your Angular application as an Angular element, everybody knows how to deal with the DOM element. I set properties on it to send it a message. I listen for events coming out of it to get feedback from it. Because it's part of the browser in all of the modern browsers, it is self-bootstrapping. I don't need to tell them any special Angular mechanics, any Angular APIs to call. They load your bundle, and it's just ready for them to start using in their DOM, and it works everywhere. For older browsers, if there's a polyfill, it's a pretty cool thing. We know that a lot of what all of you do is building the UI components to express that user interface for your application, and so we wanted to support you doing it. At Google, we have a design system called Material Design, which a lot of external companies use, and there's all of the UI components that you could possibly want available for you out of the box. It's a perfectly valid choice not to use our design system, and if that's true, you should at least be using part of our platform called our Component Dev Kit, or the CDK. So if I don't want to use Material Design, we've extracted all of the good bits, things that are really hard to do, either for performance-wise or just to get right. Things like accessibility, getting my overlays to pop up in exactly the right spot no matter where the element is on the screen, doing BiDi, doing drag and drop, all of these things. Additionally, we've also created what I'll call generic components. They don't have a design system applied to them. You can go then do this with things like the table. This is kind of a career component. You could spend your entire career building data table the right way. Well, we've done it in a way that you just put your own design system on top of it. At the beginning of 2018, we did a survey of the entire Angular community. We're about to do it again. I hope you participate. What folks told us, though, was that the Angular CLI is their favorite part. It's the thing that's made the biggest difference in their lives. So in 2018, we doubled down on it, and we invested heavily in turning it from this very simple ecosystem where you could create new applications and you could generate things like components, directives, pipes, and whatnot. We made it into an ecosystem where anybody can create a schematic for their library and open it up to generating whatever it is that makes sense in that environment, whether it's a progressive web app, it's an Ionic application, it's a native script application, all of these things. And additionally, we built this other command called update that helps me move from one version of Angular to the next, and I'll talk about this a little bit more in a minute. We had intended to build a UI on top of the console or on top of Angular CLI, but thankfully our friends at Narwhal built this for us. And if you haven't checked it out and you're not a big fan of the command line itself, this thing's amazing. All of the features that I would have gotten in the command line interface are available now in a user interface, where I can just go poke around and find out all the things it does. I don't have to go look at the manual. Not only do I not have to use the command line to interact with it, I don't even have to use the command line to install it. It's a one-click download and install, and I'm off to the races. Everything about NPM and installing the services and everything I need comes down in the installer. And I get to just interactively find out all the things the CLI can do for me. You may even discover new things through the UI. While I'm talking about the CLI ecosystem, one other place we worked with some other folks to integrate this is in StackBlitz. And if you haven't used StackBlitz, it's basically, think about VS Code, which I love, and the Angular CLI, which of course I also love, put together in your browser. Everything that I can do from using CLI extensions to the Angular language service, everything about the Angular ecosystem works here inside the browser with nothing to install at all. In many cases, they're actually faster than your desktop because they do some aggressive caching and pre-building of NPM steps that don't happen on your desktop. It's pretty cool stuff. The thing I mentioned about ngApdate, we did this because we wanted to make sure everyone could come along on every new version of Angular. We do 2 versions of Angular every year. We produce all kinds of bug fixes and new features, and we wanted to make sure it was easy for everyone to come along. We do this in 3 ways. Number 1 is, for ourselves, we were very strict about breaking changes. We can't make any big breaking changes from one version to another. We deprecate, we say, hey, look, in a future version, this is gonna be a breaking change, but you've got quite a while to update things. We have a guide at update.angular.io that helps you. If I want to go from Angular version 4 to Angular version 7, I put in those numbers, and it tells me all the steps that I need, and I just go through them, and I get the updates. And then for anything that can be done by machines, we do this automatically for you as part of the CLI in ngApdate. We hoped we were doing a good job, but just right after Christmas, we got a gift from some of our friends at Air France and KLM. They just published this Medium article about how they went from Angular version 6 to 7 in less than a day. More importantly, looks like we've actually been getting better at this over time, because where they're going from 2 to 4 took about a month, going from 4 to 5 and 5 to 6, a couple weeks, going from 6 to 7, about a day. We hope to keep getting better, or at least a day. That's as good as you can get, right? Definitely worth a read. All right. The future. Before we go into this, I should reflect a little bit. I mentioned that I used to work at this company called Next Computer. There's me in the background. So young. Aw. Here's Steve in the front. You can see how fond he is of me. My job, as I kind of explained at the beginning, was I would go around and set up machines for him and write his demos and build his slide decks. Another part of that job was that when people would come to visit Steve, I was to help them set up their demos and help them present to him and all of this good stuff. So one day, this guy comes over from Switzerland and says, hi, my name's Tim Berners-Lee, and I want to show Steve this thing called the World Wide Web. We're going to link the world's research papers together. It's going to change the way we think about knowledge. And I've just murdered Tim Berners-Lee accent. He doesn't speak that way. But that is what he said. And what I said back to him was, research papers? World Wide Web? That's a really long, dorky name. I don't think Steve's going to like it. Now, I was a little wrong. I don't know if Steve liked it. But it kind of did okay, this web thing. I reflect on this often as I try and predict the future of things. And I think I'm a little better at looking at potential versus where something is today. A lot of the things that I'm going to talk about next are big changes in the Angular ecosystem. And some of them we've been talking about for a while. They're going to take a while to get there, but I think they're going to be pretty big. One of the things I'm most excited about is actually not even coming from the Angular team itself, but another team at Google, which is where there's this kind of impedance mismatch between if I'm a designer on a team and if I'm a developer on a team, where the implementation is done here in HTML and CSS, and then as a designer, I'll go kind of replicate that in Sketch or some other tool that produces a static version of the site. I'll create some mocks out of it, and maybe do a prototype. That's kind of hard. And then once I like it, we're going to go re-implement it back in HTML and CSS. And there's a team at Google on Google Cloud Platform that wants to fix this with a tool they're calling Angular Co-Design. The idea is that you create this living spec, something that's actually live and would really mirror the live application because it uses the same UI components that you'd be using in production. Any of my Angular material design, any of my Clarity components, any of my Bootstrap components, whatever you're happening to use, any Angular components can be imported into the tool and used by designers to actually build out the next set of features. Not only does it let you build a high-fidelity replication of the app, but it can actually be live, backed by either data from a spreadsheet or actually live data from your application. So you can test it with your users to make sure you got it right. And then just export those mocks as templates and then go right back into production. This is actually being used today inside Google, and they plan to release it this year. I don't have an exact release schedule, but you can go read more about it on our blog. They did a guest blog post, and they talk about how you can get involved if you want to be on the early access plan. One of the other things I'm also very excited about is exporting another technology we have at Google called Bazel. Bazel is the build system we use at Google, and if you know something about Google, maybe you also know that all of our code is in one single code base that we always build from head. Whether I'm on search or Gmail or YouTube or AdWords, we're all in the same code base. We all use the same versions of all of the libraries. And the only way we can do it is with this build system called Bazel. Bazel, based on the last description, it scales about as big as you can imagine, or about the biggest team that you can think of. The reason it can do this is because it knows how to only rebuild stuff that has never been built by any developer at Google. We have a large cloud-based cache that if anybody at Google has ever built part of that component chain, it gets to reuse it, and it knows which things it can build in parallel. Not only can it scale to an environment the size of Google, but it not only builds the front end, like we would need in TypeScript and Angular, but it can also build your back end, whether it's in Java or Python or C# or what have you. It's multi-language, and what this means is that I can release my applications all at the same time, front end and back end, know that they're tested together. Right now, Bazel is in the CLI as an option. You can get in as an early access, and we actually use it on the Angular team. Every time we build Angular, it's built using Bazel. There's still a bunch of rough edges, but if you're interested, our newest member, Minko Getchev, has written a blog post about how to get going with Bazel in the CLI. Last thing I want to talk about, we actually want to expand what's possible to do with Angular, because for the longest time, we've been really good at building these big industrial strength applications like we do at Google. At the same time, a lot of companies say, hey, we'd also like to do some of our lighter weight use cases using Angular. And so that's something we started to invest in 2018 with Universal for doing server-side rendering, fast initial loading. For doing the JavaScript loading, we've invested in optimization through the CLI. Angular Elements for distributing parts of my application. And the next phase is a new renderer that we're calling Ivy. Ivy has a couple goals. Number one, we want to make it possible to build very small applications with Angular. Two, we want to be able to compile faster. Right now, if I make any change to an Angular application, it's likely that the compiler has to recompile the entire thing. Not true with Ivy. I change one component, it only has to recompile that single component. And better developer experience. In terms of size, if I ask my Angular developers to build the smallest version of an Angular application that you can, right before it doesn't work at all, they can get it down to about 36K. I think externally, 50 or more K would be all that anybody could reasonably do. I set a goal for them. I said, hey, if you can get Hello World in under 10K, I will bake you a cake. This was a credible threat because I used to be a caterer and I love making cakes. They got kind of excited last year because they thought they were going to get close to this goal. They said, hey, Brad, did you mean minified or compressed? And I'm like, just give me an excuse to make a cake. The good news is the minified version currently in the labs is coming in at about 7.3K and compressed about 2.7K. You're not shipping Hello World. Don't get that impressed. But what this means is that you only got to pay for what you use in Angular in 2019. This is going to be a backwards compatible change that we're going to test across all of the applications at Google, so you know it's going to work for you without any big migration cost. And here's how it's going to roll out. In Angular V8, this is our intention. Things can change, caveat. But we want to make Ivy an opt-in. And at the opt-in phase in version 8, you're going to get some benefits. One is a slightly faster runtime with much better memory overhead. So if you're deploying to mobile devices, this is going to be great. You're going to have smaller builds, slightly smaller. You're not going to get quite to the 2.3K, 2.7K build size, but you will see a small drop in your application size. Faster builds, certainly faster incremental rebuilds. and better debugging. One of the things I loved in AngularJS, we kind of lost in Angular, was I used to be able to right-click on a component, and then in the Chrome Dev Console, get right to the class that backed that component, and that comes back in Ivy. In V9, then, we want to move it to be the default. The default that everybody will be using. We'll have had a bunch of time to prove it out. We'll be able to get to those really tiny builds if you're building small applications for mobile or what have you. And we want to roll it out with a slew of easier to use APIs so you can start much simpler if I'm building a very simple thing with Angular. One last thing, this guy Urs, whatever happened to him, he's still at Google. Within that compass, or that umbrella of everybody using Angular at Google, not everybody, but being the biggest thing used at Google, Cloud Platform is the biggest user of Angular. Cloud Platform is run by Urs. So he's gone from maybe being our first detractor to our biggest fan and supporter. We have to thank him for that. Thank all of you for coming. Thanks for being part of the community. Bye.
I have to say, it's an honor to talk to someone who has been pushing web development just way further than anybody could imagine. So thank you for that.
Yeah, I think the community owes you a huge thanks. This whole room. Let's give them a
yeah, one more.
And you know what? I love the choice of clothes, like the shirt, one thing, but even Angular socks.
It goes deep here, man.
Yeah. No, I noticed that, I was like, oh, damn, he's got Angular socks on. That's awesome.
Yeah, when I get dressed in the morning, I think Angular, right?
Yeah, exactly. It's always on the brain, no matter what. That's
Yes,
great.
yes.
And I remember actually you being here last year and talking about a lot of the great things that were coming, and we saw that. All through 2018, we've seen all of that come through. But honestly, what the most impressive thing was that article that you said right at the end of the year for how fast the airline updated to the latest version of Angular. That's impressive. Working on large applications, it's so painful to upgrade just to the latest version of a framework, and being able to do that in a day is mind blowing.
Oh, we were so happy to see that.
Yeah.
Because we had done so much work on it, we weren't sure. You never know how it's going to play out in the real world.
Yeah.
We're actually responsible for updating all of the Google applications. So we build a ton of tools for ourselves. We thought that by exporting some of those in that ng update command, that was going to be helpful, but really amazing to see.
Yeah, no, it's super impressive. I think that's just telling right there. It's a successful year, and I'm excited for the next year, all the great things to come. What do you, go ahead.
What I really love is that your focus isn't necessarily oh, our next framework has async await and generators and code. It's more just thinking about the developers and just, I can upgrade in maybe a week, a day, a few hours, a few minutes. That's more what I want people to think about. And it's awesome that you're pushing that a lot more, because everybody's features, feature, feature. It's what about the developers, people actually using our code?
Well, it just becomes harder. Each feature is probably adding more bloat, and it's harder, so yeah.
You're
still getting the features, though, so that's good, too. Yeah.
I didn't talk about everything. My team gets very nervous when I say everything they're supposed to do in a year. Yeah. They're well, there's no wiggle room. How can I miss on anything? Yeah. So that was the basics.
What are you most excited for in 2019 for Angular?
For me, I think we've done a really good job inside Google developing a really robust environment. We're trying to export as much of that as possible. So we talked about some of it in what we're going to do with Bazel.
Yep.
And there's some other techniques inside Google for how we deliver very fast sites. We want to export more of that and just deliver more of how we develop things at Google to anybody can do it.
That's awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us on stage, and thank you for such a great talk and all the amazing work with Angular.
Thank you.
Thank you.